The Life Sciences DNA podcast is sponsored by Agilicium Labs, a collaborative space where Agilicium works with its clients to co-develop and incubate POCs, products, and solutions. To learn how Agilicium Labs can use the power of its generative AI for life sciences analytics, visit them at labs.agilicium.com. Amar, we've got Anastasia Christensen on the show today. Who is Anastasia?
Dr. Anastasia Christensen is a visionary data science and AI senior executive with over 3 decades of experience driving data science, AI, and information technology innovation in the pharmaceutical industry and across 4 major pharma companies. She was most recently an SVP and global head of AI, data and analytics at Pfizer. Prior to that, she was a vice president of IT at Johnson & Johnson, leading the information and technology needs of all therapy areas, including clinical development, pharmaceutical development, digital health, and innovation. In her more than 30 years in pharma, she actually started as a wet lab scientist, leading drug discovery projects before moving into data science and IT, and has worked in a variety of IT and informatics positions, including AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Leidos Biomed. Anastasia is now a senior consultant and strategic advisor who has a wealth of experience applying AI within large pharmaceutical companies.
And what are you hoping to hear from Anastasia today?
So I would like to hear her thoughts on the pros and cons of different data analytics organizational models in pharma companies, also some of the successful use cases of AI, and how pharma companies are adopting the use of this technology.
Before we begin, I want to remind our audience members that if they want to keep up on the latest episodes from Life Sciences DNA, they should hit the subscribe button. If you're enjoying this content, hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. With that, let's welcome Anastasia to the show.
Anastasia, thanks for joining us. You've been intimately involved in the use of AI in some large and well-established companies. But first of all, I would like to get your view on the definition of AI.
All right, I'll start first by thanking you for inviting me to join you here. I look forward to an exciting conversation. So, as far as definitions of AI, there are a number of official and unofficial definitions of AI, but more or less, they are all consistent in acknowledging that artificial intelligence or AI is a broad term that refers to a variety of technologies that enable machines to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence or that mimic human intelligence. It's a combination of computer science, math, and cognitive sciences, and it uses algorithms to mimic human behavior.
Mm-hmm. And so we think of AI as being a disruptive technology, changing the way an organization works. But I'd like to start by getting your view from the inside of how a company might evolve its structure to integrate AI and data analytics across different departments. So you have headed a lot of these analytics teams, the AI teams. How do you go about it, or what are some of the different ideas you've seen in a company as they implement AI?
So I guess the main thing, and I have seen, as you said, I have seen a lot of different technologies being implemented. In fact, I started off as a scientist in drug discovery and development and moved to data science and technology out of sheer passion for bringing the experience and the knowledge that I have from being in the labs or directing the work in the labs to using the technology most effectively. There is no one size fits all. And it really is a matter of co-creation that I strongly feel in that you need to co-create. As far as models for how do you organize, this kind of technological work, I don't think there's any one method that works best. And in the end, it's not really the organizational structure that gets things done. I personally believe in a hybrid model or a hub and spoke model where you have a central group as the hub, the spokes as being embedded, or rather integrated into the functions, the organizations that you're supporting, and then you ensure that you are co-creating and you are working together.
As you're talking about the hub and spoke model, but as we know in pharmaceuticals, you have a lot of different domains. You have research, and there's biology, chemistry in there. Then you have development, manufacturing, medical affairs, Pfizer. So you think one central function can really like serve all these different domains in this hub and spoke model?
Well, remember, there's the spokes that are embedded inside of the individual organizations. And then it's a matter of whether they're dotted line or solid line. And I'll say again that organizational lines aren't what gets the work done. It's the partnership that happens. So yes, one central organization will accelerate and facilitate the embedded organizations, the organizations that are integrated into the individual functions that you mentioned, your manufacturing, research, development, clinical, commercial, etc. So the spokes are the ones that are integrated, and the hub is the one that partners with them, scales solutions, brings knowledge, oftentimes from one organization to the other, because different organizations aren't always as connected as we'd like to think that they are. So the hub serves as that glue that brings the spokes together, that integrates, that has a center of excellence, that from a technology and a data perspective, and supports the integrated groups that are in individual functions to be most effective.
Gotcha. Now, I've also seen like in some of the big pharma companies that they're just the AI teams are just separate in research versus development. So what do you think are some of the downsides of having those kind of models in this big pharma?
Yeah, so when you have individual groups working on their own in silos, if you don't have that connection to a central organization, that's when you end up with reinventing the wheel. You end up with inefficient solutions because you're not scaling from one to another. I've been in organizations long enough and in this kind of central organization enough that I've seen the immediate benefit of taking something from research and modifying it and scaling it and using it in commercial or vice versa. Same with manufacturing. You focus on something very specific to manufacturing, you learn from that, and then you take the main components of it and you can implement elsewhere. And what you can do is then develop accelerators of sorts, right? That can then be enhanced as you take something that you developed for one organization and tweak it, tailor it for another organization. So it goes faster, you learn along the way, and you avoid the siloed thinking and the reinventing the wheel.
But then when you think about the hub and spoke model, where you do have this centralized AI team, one of the reasons I've seen that companies are not able to manage that very well is that there is so much to manage. There are so many different areas to cover. And then a lot of times the central team needs to make choices, right, about like what to cover, what not. And then sometimes the domains get frustrated. They're not getting enough support or the central team is not close enough. So based on your extensive experience, like what is it that central team need to do to be able to make this a successful model?
So again, that'll be my view based on my experience in 4 major pharma companies, right? The first thing is to think about it as co-creation. So you're creating things together, you're learning from one another. So when you're co-creating, you also need to prioritize, obviously, for the reasons that you said. You can't be everywhere at the same time. So you need a network, a council, whatever you want to call it, a group that brings the leaders. Let's say if we're doing it for AI, you need the AI leaders from the individual functions, coming together with the leader of the central group and defining strategy, defining priorities, working together on understanding where one solution is going to help another, one solution from one function is going to help another solution in another function, and decide on priorities. Oftentimes what happens is, money talks. One organization has the money and they might have the loudest voice. And so, people will start there. If you have a co-created enterprise strategy that then brings together the where are you going to start, where are you going to end, not necessarily from a functional perspective, but from a capability perspective. And if multiple functions benefit from one capability, that's going to prioritize it higher than a capability that only one function is going to benefit. Now, that one function, it might be the most important thing that they are looking for, and they, might need it right away. So that then becomes a conversation about how much can the central function scale, and to what extent you just allow that function to just proceed, while it's kind of who leads and who follows, right? So maybe that function will lead because they have the need, they have the knowledge, and they have urgency. So they're going to get started, but the central function will be involved in some minimal way, at least, to learn from it and then take that and run with it later with either scaling or bring it to other functions as well.
Okay.
It's there's no real one way of doing it. It has to be a partnership and prioritizing together and being ready to, being agile with decisions.
Sure. And when we are talking about, like, say, the AI team, but then there's also, like, you have data, and in data you have the even data quality, data governance, data strategy, data platforms. Related to, then you have your descriptive analytics, you have your predictive analytics. Now, a lot of the predictive, prescriptive, you can put that as part of AI. So even the AI team itself, how do you think, what should be part of the AI team? Should there be things that are should be separate from in a data team, or how do you think about all of that?
Personally, I think that if your data foundations are off, or if your data are siloed, you're not going to have good, strong AI capabilities. So I see the two as being very tightly connected. So you need the data to build the models to be able to make use of AI capabilities. So for me, the two need to be very intimately connected, interrelated. Okay. With data comes governance and quality. And governance, there's no doubt that there has to be governance around data. Who can use the data, therefore who can use the model, what confidentialities are in place, and so on, so that you can put the right restrictions, if you will, on the models based on any restrictions that are in the data. When it comes to quality, it's an interesting question, and I've been grappling with that a little bit, because of course you need quality data in order to have good, robust models. But we also know that ChatGPT, as an example, was built on all the data that's available on the internet, and we know that not all of it is quality data. So we also need to be careful about spending an inordinate amount of time cleaning the data and having the data be just so, recognizing that if you don't have some variability in the quality of the data, the model is going to be limited as well, because the model is not going to be able to learn what's good quality data and what is not good quality data. So there are some advantages to not looking to clean the data 100%, but to have some variability in there and allowing the model to learn. What you need to be vigilant about, though, is bias in the data. So you need to be clear about what bias there are in the data. And there are methods now, there are in fact AI-driven methods that can help with that can help with reviewing data quality, with cleaning data, with filling gaps, with flagging where there's bias in the data so that the human user can make a decision about what to do about that.
But as you're saying, right, like the exact organizational model doesn't matter. It's basically that the data team needs to be working very closely with the AI analytics team, and then they need to be working closely with the business team or so, like that needs to happen whichever way the organizational lines kind of fall.
Yeah, so I would say maybe I would hedge less by saying it helps to have a central data group, but it has to be a central data group because that's what's going to de-silo your data. That's what's going to make sure that the foundations are common and the foundations, one builds on the other. So it absolutely helps to have a central data group. The governance aspect of that, there's no way a central group can govern all of the data. So that needs to be done in partnership with the individual functions and the data owners, stewards, whatever you want to call it, within those functions to make sure that we are applying the right standards, we're applying the right access privileges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about like this, the hub and spoke model, and then some of the benefits and challenges, but just want to like focus on like a bit more on that. Are there any other kind of challenges that you see? I mean, we talked about like, you overcome with the co-creation, which is very important, but how, like, what are some of the challenges that, like, as you have set up these kind of teams, what are the challenges that you have faced and how have you overcome those?
Yeah. Some of the challenges, okay, let me see if I can. So first of all is getting enough people in the organization who are both technical and understand the science of the function that they're supporting. So kind of wearing that being double-hatted. But of course with, enter AI though. So you need people that wear three hats. So they understand the domain that they're working with. They understand the technology very well. And they understand the math, so to speak, right? The math mm-hmm. and the computer science of building models. So finding people that have all three skills is not easy. It's not impossible. There's plenty of folks who do have that, but finding enough of them and bring enough. And then the question is, what's enough? Because you're not going to have a department that's fully staffed with people like that. So having then the really deep technologists and the really deep mathematicians and some really deep scientists, if we're talking about the science domain, or commercial mm-hmm. folks, marketing folks, if we're talking about the commercial marketing, in that kind of central organization. But perhaps even more important than that, having a really tight working relationship with mm-hmm. the embedded group that probably would be much stronger on the domain than mm-hmm. they would be on the technology. So having that very tight coupling is important. So skills is absolutely the number one hurdle sometimes that we get over. The other thing is, of course, the communication, because people get working and they forget to communicate with one another. It's just standard, right? So the communication between the various groups that need to be involved. And then the other thing I'd say, the technology is continually evolving. Even before AI got so popular and has been evolving very, very quickly, the technology stack that you use, I'll say we started with trying to get rid of data silos by building data warehouses and data marts, and then moving from that to data lakes. And then it was data lakes, data swamps, and data lake houses. And now we talk about data fabric.
Yes.
So the I'm going to say the technology, but it's also the approach is continually evolving. And so you need people who are evolving with it and understand the fit for purpose solution and are able to design, you have the architecture group that's able to design something that will evolve with the evolution of the technology, and not find yourself 5 years down the line, starting from scratch. So having that agile, evolutionary mindset of what we're building on the technology stack is critical.
That's a tough task, though. I mean, to be able to do all of this, right?
It is, which is why you have roles and responsibilities, right? So you will have in your central group, you can't just have the doers. You need to have the strategists as well. You need to have the people who are going to stay on top of what the technology is, or how the technology is evolving, rather, how the tech stack is evolving, how AI capabilities are evolving, how models are learning. So you'll have those experts who are constantly at the forefront, not necessarily trying to implement everything new, but rather learning what's new and being able to be connected with the doers on particular projects to have these meaningful conversations about, there's this new capability now, there's this new technology. How does this fit in? When do we integrate that? Let's have the conversation with the people who are going to use this as end users, right? And when's the right time to move? And if you have really good, strong architects, they will have architected any solution in a way that it can evolve. And that's what's important, is being able to build something that's modular enough that you can then evolve, plug and play, so to speak.
Okay. So it's important, like, to have the modular solutions, because then, and you can plug and play, but then you can also use them in a lot of different use cases. So across the pharma value chain.
Absolutely. And it's really important for your models as well, right? To have plug and play components to the models. So you don't have to keep reinventing your code, writing new code.
Yeah, absolutely. So this brings me to the question that I want to ask you about, creating the center of excellence for AI, which is the hub there, right? And so how, like, your thoughts about that? I mean, you've already shared some of the thoughts, which is we need to have like 3 types of people there, right? One is the technology specialists, the math wizards to do the models, and some of these scientists or business folks. So how do you kind of like arrange that center of excellence?
Org structure is probably less important than the operating model. Okay. So I think you can have more than one. Well, not in one organization you want one org structure, but when you compare different organizations, you can have variations on that org structure. But the operating model really needs to be around developing something, testing it, and then scaling it. If you, so kind of a design, make, test kind of model that we might use in the sciences. So when you're designing, you have to move in an agile way. The design needs to keep evolving as new technology comes in, as new requirements come in. So you evolve the design. The test is where you build your model, for example, and you look at whether there are any biases, whether it addresses the need that you have, whether you have all the data that you need, whether you have any biases in those data, and so on. And only when that is tried and true tested do you look at scaling. And when you're scaling, you think of it as a cycle, right? It's a circle. So when you're scaling, you're also looking at has anything changed? Do we need to change anything in the final tool? Do we need to test something new to bring into the final solution that you have? So you need to constantly be going in that cycle and moving forward in that cycle. The danger is that you can get stuck in the cycle and you don't move forward. So it's definitely a cycle that keeps moving forward. And if you're doing that appropriately, and you keep monitoring the technology externally, you keep monitoring the requirements, you keep monitoring the results that you're getting, and you're evolving, you almost don't ever have to start from scratch, right? But if you build something and say, okay, here it is, guys have it, we're going to move to another project, then depending on what technology you've used, and if it's AI, probably in 3 months, it'll be out of date, right? In the past, it might take a year before things are out of date. So, and with a hub organization, you have to be careful that you don't run out of resources, because if you keep everything, well, how much do you staff something that has now delivered the end product, but you need to stay on top of it? So it's that AI ops, if you will, right? AI ML ops that you need to have. And how do you staff that appropriately so that you can keep evolving rather than do the stop and go?
Gotcha. Okay.
And you have enough resources to do the next project, because you need to keep picking up the next project.
Yeah. So in terms of ROI, what I mean is, like, what is the return on investment, and how the companies are measuring return on investment? What are there specific metrics that they're using, or what are your thoughts here?
As you know, AI, the enthusiasm around AI grew exponentially at the end of 2022 and 2023. Yeah. But we have experience from using AI before that. So we've been using AI the term was first coined in the 1940s, and we've been using it little bits at a time then. How did we measure the return on investment in the earlier use cases? It was mostly based on innovation and operations, acceleration of operations. The use cases that we've developed in the past year and a half to 2 years now, many of them are in the operations space. What I mean by that is accelerating a lot of the work that we do in drug discovery and development, accelerating our manufacturing processes, accelerating our clinical trial processes, accelerating writing documents, and so on. So we start by measuring the core of what is it enabling, and usually it's speed, and then the cost of doing this. And ultimately, it's the value that the business gets from it. I don't know that we've reached the point yet where we can speak a lot about the business value, but that's ultimately the goal. And the business value will end up being in honestly, in the pharmaceutical industry, it's getting medicines to patients faster. So when we reach the point where we have reduced the time from early discovery through to patient significantly, and keep in mind that time has been getting smaller and smaller, shorter and shorter, not smaller, but shorter and shorter. When we get to the point where we can say it is now half what it used to be, say in 2025, and what it used to be in 2022, or more than that, then that's the value that you then need to look at. What are all the components that contributed to that? So ultimately, it's speed to patient, and of course, cost to getting from the very early steps through to the getting something to the patients. A lot of the benefit that we're seeing right now, I'm not going to say value yet, but benefit is in the operations, in accelerating operations, and again, designing trials faster, getting the clinical trial up and running faster, writing protocols faster, writing clinical study reports faster. Also in the preclinical space, doing many of the operational activities faster, same with manufacturing and so on. The innovation piece, which is what's probably going to take us in leaps and bounds faster, that's still coming. So what I mean by it's still coming, we're using it, and we're using it to define or identify new molecules for therapeutic intervention. Mm-hmm. But you need to test those, and you test them in clinical trials. So that still takes time. And so I would estimate that we probably have a couple more years before we see the first drug in patients or being delivered to the market, to the patient, that mm-hmm. started with an AI capability designing it, or that had AI being used throughout its entire process, as opposed to what we do now, where we're using AI at different steps, but not necessarily from start to finish.
Yes, that'll be pretty interesting. And as you said early on, right, that right now people talk a lot about AI, but I mean, I think, I've been using AI my entire career. Like machine learning to me is AI, and that's something, in research we've been using it for the last 2-3 decades. And of course, I mean, what we've seen is some of these examples where analytics of this genomics data, proteomics data using machine learning that has produced some new drugs which have gone all the way. But as you're saying, it's only one specific part where AI is not used, not like in the entire pipeline there, right?
Yeah, and so one can argue that we are using AI in every step of the drug discovery and development process. That's correct, right? It's a correct statement. What we're not doing though, so what we're doing is we're using it in step 1, step 2, step 3, in order for me to not mention which steps, but we're using AI in multiple steps. What we're not yet doing is kind of revolutionizing the steps that we normally take by saying we're skipping 3 or 4 steps because we're using AI, or we're using AI to help us leapfrog over some of the steps. We're not at that point yet where we're holistically using AI across the entire process and eliminating some steps, because AI is enabling us to do that. We'll get there. We're just not there yet. Gotcha.
Now, you mentioned about some of these examples, right? Like of getting operational gains or so. Is there like 1 or 2 examples that really stand out at this point, like stand out in terms of really something, with AI, machine learning that has really changed the way how drug discovery or manufacturing has been done over the last, let's say, decade or 2?
Yeah, so I will say that the pharmaceutical development and the manufacturing process, because it is kind of a stochastic process, we know the ends. It's while complicated in its own right, it's not as complicated as biology is. That's an area that I think has had the most progress and has traditionally started using technologies, AI being one of them, before any of the other steps. And you can see the end results and the benefits faster. So I will say that during the pandemic, and more than one company, and I worked for one company during the pandemic developing a vaccine, and another company I joined after and the vaccine was developed. And I can say that in both cases, and probably everybody else that was developing a vaccine, that's probably the best example that most people will relate to, where AI was used at different steps of the process. And I know in the company where I was, we used it in the manufacturing process, building digital twins of the manufacturing process to accelerate developing and delivering the vaccine. So There are multiple steps that AI was used in the process of developing the vaccine, and we saw the benefit, right? We saw the benefit, which was not only because of AI, but AI was a big component. There were also other components that we were working in a very agile way, and many of the steps, we were putting more people on it in order to go faster, and so on. Not taking shortcuts, but just accelerating because we could put more people on, because that was the most important thing that we could do. When you are juggling a bigger portfolio, you have to prioritize, and you often have to prioritize one program over another, and you might not have as many resources, so things might go a little bit slower. So while that process of developing the vaccine identified opportunities for us to accelerate that we have implemented, or the organizations have implemented going forward. There are also some steps that couldn't necessarily be maintained unless we were putting in an AI capability that then we would use going forward.
So now, in terms of we talked about the benefits and then some of these examples, but when you take these AI solutions from pilot projects and scale it company-wide, what are some of the challenges that you've seen?
Not everything can be scaled as well as you think that might be. And we've seen examples. So some things will surprise you. And what I mean by that as an example is taking something that you were doing in research and now scaling it to be used in other functions or in other processes. So what is it that we see with scaling? We see the complexity and the variability in how different parts of the organization work. And so the learning there is sometimes it's not as easy to scale a solution as you might think, but you have to look at what is scalable and what is not scalable. So one size fits all does not always work, right? And that's part of the reason why I mentioned that cycle of design, make, test, right? So when you're scaling, is when you're actually testing and running it and scaling it. It's kind of the last step before you go back to design. And you can't take shortcuts on that, but you can learn along the way. And that's in the design is where you can then look at, okay, another organization has a different process. So can the same make cycle, if you will, work, or do we have to modify the design and the make cycle? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but effectively it's scaling is essential. We have to look at being able to scale. It's not always easy, but when it works, when you're able to scale, you see orders of magnitude of benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, these days, a lot of tech bio companies are coming up with AI. So what advice would you give the traditional pharma companies as they're engaging with these new tech bio companies for their AI initiatives?
Yeah. So I think that what I mentioned earlier about taking one step at a time and looking to use AI or accelerate one step at a time, it works. It's the approach that we're taking. It's a different approach, though, than the tech bio companies are taking. With tech bio companies, because they're starting with digital natives and they're starting without having the legacy process, if you will, in place, they're reimagining how you would do the entire process. So I would say take note, partner, and there'll be mutual learning from both sides, because the tech bio companies, while they are digital natives and they can think outside the box, they might also think outside the box in a way that really isn't feasible, isn't possible. And you don't want them to find out too late. So that's where the partnership is essential. And you've seen some big partnerships actually that have happened between Recursion, for example, and Genentech, I think, and maybe Amgen as well. I can't remember, but there are. So that's just one example. There's multiple other examples where tech bio companies are, NVIDIA working with pharmaceutical companies and so on. So I think the partnership is essential. Learning from one another is essential. And as there was a recent article that I read, I think it might have been a BCG article that basically said you don't have to, you have to be careful how you think about how you build your AI center of excellence or how you build your AI groups, that you meld the scientific pharmaceutical knowledge with the technology knowledge, and you don't pluck someone out of a completely technical organization, plug them in and assume that they're going to change everything now. So because it's going to be a learning curve, because there are differences in the way scientists work, the way clinicians work, the way healthcare works. And you have to understand the nuances. You have to understand the technology, not be limited by it, but you have to understand it in order to apply the technology appropriately. So you got to give some time to, if you are hiring a technologist to jump into a pharmaceutical industry, give them the time to learn and adapt, and vice versa. If you're taking someone out of the pharmaceutical industry into a tech organization, you've got to make sure that they're learning the opportunities that are there and aren't restricted by their history.
Gotcha. So, I mean, you've talked a lot about like how what companies need to do to implement the AI, right? And just trying to summarize all of that, what are the lessons, right, at a high level would you give to the companies as they are integrating AI into their approach? I mean, you did talk about as tech and traditional pharma merging, make sure that it's merging the right way. Organizational the boundaries don't matter as long as you're putting the right functions together, right, and doing the co-development. Just wanted to talk about, are there any other big lessons that you would like to give to the audience about how to get AI into pharma?
Yeah, I would also say careful about thinking of it as a shiny object and you're looking for where to apply it. So shiny object, apply it to anything. Think of where the biggest bottlenecks are that we have. What are the biggest bottlenecks, and how can you apply AI to resolve those bottlenecks? If you're looking at AI as a silver bullet that's going to solve every single problem, you're going to get mired in the detail, and you're going to be overwhelming the organization and the experts that you have, because you're pulling them in too many directions. So I think the most important thing that we can do, in whether it be pharmaceutical industry or biotechs, is identify the 2 or 3 or 5, however many, not 25. What are the biggest bottlenecks, the biggest problems that you have that if you solve are going to be life-changing, so to speak, or are going to be are going to accelerate what you're doing. Think of those few and then focus on those. And work through in a collaborative way, as I said, co-creating, bringing the technologists and the scientists together to understand one another and work through in an iterative way to resolve it. And some problems are going to take longer than others, and you might need to have the patience to resolve it, and not go necessarily for a silver bullet, but actually make sure that you are not boiling the ocean, that you're not trying to, completely solve the problem, but you're doing it in an iterative fashion. As long as you're seeing progress, you then iterate and you keep moving forward.
Thanks for that insight. Dr. Anastasia Christensen, Senior Consultant and Strategic Advisor. Anastasia, thank you for your time and insights today.
Amar, thank you. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Well, Amar, what did you think?
It was fascinating discussion, and she gave a lot of guidance around how the pharma companies should be working in terms of setting up the right organizational model, how they should be working with the biotech companies, tech bio companies, and also how how they should be just like having the right operating model as well.
Anastasia talked about the need for collaboration across teams. Do companies generally operate with a central data group, or do they tend to have focused projects and focused teams?
Well, I've seen it both ways. What I've seen so far is that in the small and the mid-sized companies, you usually have one centralized group that can cater to the different domains. But then as the companies become bigger, it becomes a bit hard to manage. And that's something that I did ask her, right? It was like in the big pharma companies, because these are huge companies, and then really it's really hard to know exactly what's going on in the different groups. That's where I've seen it a bit harder to manage, although some companies are trying that. So in the big pharma company, I've seen both models.
There's a human resource issue here. She talked about the need for people with scientific, technological, and mathematical expertise. How do you see the integration of AI reshaping the demand for talent within biopharma?
Yeah, see, those people, I mean, I call them unicorns because they need to have all these three aspects. And yes, there are some of them, but it's hard to find them, and it's hard to convince them that you should work in our company for a reasonable price. Yeah, it is a challenge. It's also how to best um, how to best actually you know use them, or how to make use of them is a big question. Also, I mean, one of the things I've seen, one challenging thing, especially those who have really great mathematical and technological knowledge, why they should work for pharma. A lot of them do prefer to work for the big IT companies, or they tend to work for the finance companies. Pharma is something that they don't necessarily want to work at. So that is a big challenge. I think, yeah. So this is something. It has been. I think the pharma companies though are doing a good job of attracting the talent now. But I think it's an uphill battle at this point. Although it's also, you don't. I mean, a pharma company doesn't need like thousands of these people either. They need a handful of these people based on the size of the company, who can then actually shape the way things should be. And it's also, you have to also look at, okay, well, exactly what type of skills you need, because it's hard to get people with all three skills at the same time. So if you're looking for two specific skills, then you really have to map them in the right place so that they are enjoying and in the job, and then they're learning from that, and you're getting value from them as well.
She talked about the benefits she's seen so far, which have largely been speed. She didn't want to use the word value, though, and she sees the innovation piece as being something that's still several years off. Is that true for the industry more broadly?
I would say what she was referring to when she talked about this innovation is like one is creating these new molecules, new small and large molecules, using AI technology and driving through them. And yes, that it's early days for those, and we haven't really seen like great examples of success there. We've had we've had a lot of progress in using, let's say, the traditional machine learning methods in analyzing a lot of experiments, getting a lot of insights. And even with generative AI now, we're seeing getting a lot of insights, a lot of even content creation, which is again is going to speed things up. It's going to get get the compounds on or the drugs on the market faster. So as she was talking about the operational efficiency, right? Like this is all going to relate to translate into that. Now, in terms of creating these new molecules, is something that what we need to see how that's going to be. I would say like some of that has like when you apply AI in or in early discovery like genomics, proteomics, yes, you do see some novel molecules that you can identify. But this new idea of just creating these new molecules that don't exist, that is something that may drive and that's the innovation that may drive the science quite a bit.
The last thing she said was that companies really shouldn't think about AI as a silver bullet, but instead they should think about their biggest bottlenecks and how they can apply AI. Is that a more practical way for companies to think about integrating AI?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no silver bullet. We have seen it even in my career. Like I've seen a lot of new things that come up, and they're hailed as silver bullets. And of course, they have their uses, and they have come and stayed. Bioinformatics was a great one at the beginning of my career when it was thought of as a silver bullet. I mean, of course, it did open up some new targets, a lot of new targets actually that we didn't think of before. So it did, and because of that, we have now more drugs because of that than not. But it's not like we have come up with the cure for all diseases because of that. So these make progress, and a lot of these technologies will bring us to the next level of scientific enlightenment. But this is another step. Yes, it is a good step. It is a big step, but I like the practical approach that she talked about. It's right now I do believe there's way too much hype, and people who especially who don't understand AI think that it's going to solve everything. So what usually happens is that when people start understanding what it can do, then they really start getting their expectations down. So yes, we need to focus on different areas because if you try to apply it across the board, you cannot. No one has the resources to apply it across the board. There's so many use cases where it can be applied. So you have to be very careful. You have to pick the ones where you have the biggest pain points, apply them there, see if it's working, right? Because there's no guarantee that it's going to work in a specific use case. So you have to do that, and then you learn from that, and then have some practical expectations about the success of AI.
Well, a lot to think about there, but another great conversation. Amar, until next time.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Agilicium Labs. Life Sciences DNA is a bi-monthly podcast produced by the Levine Media Group with production support from Fullview Media. Be sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Music for this podcast is provided courtesy of the Jonah Levine Collective. We'd love to hear from you. Pop us a note at danny@levinemediagroup.com. For Life Sciences DNA and Dr. Amar Dravid, I'm Daniel Levine. Thanks for joining us.